much smaller as time goes by.
Arthur, at this stage of development, how are you feeding it?
I fertilize all our trees exactly the same because we've got 200-something plants. They all get 20-20-20 chemical water-soluble fertilizer like Peters or Miracle Grow. That's not the brand we use, but it's the same stuff. And it gets it every week from beginning about the end of May until right about now, all through the summer. Yes, so I have some advantages because I work in an arboretum, you know. If I had to just go by what I read in bonsai books and such, I'd do things differently. But because I work with people who are horticulturists by training, they have a different view on how stuff should be done. And I try to listen to what they say and incorporate it where it makes sense to me. So this was cut off in a rather blunt way, and my feeling is I'm going to let the plant sort itself out. It's already producing a callus around that cut, and this wood will probably rot away after a while. I don't know if it'll be a cavity there or if the callus will roll in and cover it completely. Not really worried about it. Whatever the tree decides will be just fine with me. Up here, it's a different matter because I want it to look more like a natural fork instead of a place where something was cut away. So at this point, now that it's stabilized, and I can see exactly what's alive and what isn't, I'm going to go ahead and notch it. Just so it can start covering itself in this pattern. Well, this could be done quicker with a rotary tool, but it's such a delicate move that it could be done badly with a rotary tool as well. So sometimes hand tools just work at a better rate of speed, you know, and you're less likely to screw up. Very easy to screw up with a power tool. Guess that's why guys like them. Okay, so that's notched, and if you look, you can see a white color around the periphery of the cut, and that's living material. And I want that to be entire. There's places here where I don't see that. Take a knife and make sure that that living material is visible all the way around the cut, because from that comes the callus that I'm expecting to come in and smooth this over. So I cut to make sure it shows, and then I'll seal it up. Anybody else with questions?
Because some of the leaves are still green on there, does that mean that all the energy hasn't been transferred down into the stump and the roots?
Possibly so, but the amount that hasn't, I think, is negligible. You know, when the tree is mostly colored up and a certain percentage of the leaves have already fallen off, for all intents and purposes, that tree has shut itself down for the year. But yeah, the translocation might not have been entirely done, but I don't think I lost anything considerable in doing it today.
How do you get the leaves to be small?
What I find with red maples, the best technique to get the leaves to reduce is leaf pruning, but never all at once. So when the leaves come out in spring, you know, we enjoy the fresh light green color of them, and at first at least they're quite small, but then they get larger and larger and larger. Some of them will be too big almost immediately, and those I'll go through and remove. I never count the number, but you might think in terms of like every time you do a leaf removal, you're taking off 15 to 20 leaves, right? Scattered around the tree. Never all on one branch, taking away from all parts of the tree, focusing on leaves that are too big Or leaves that are damaged some way. Maybe they got ripped in a hailstorm, maybe something chewed on it. Those things you take off first. Get rid of them. Keep doing that throughout the growing season. I usually stop sometime in early August. We're going through and systematically removing the larger leaves. And then the plant regrows new leaves, of course, and those tend to be smaller. And in the end, if you do a good job and keep up with it, you can get them all down to this size. Absolutely can. If that's not small enough for you, then you should be working with Hokkaido elms or something. That's definitely a small enough leaf in my book.
So you can actually force the leaves to be that small on this type of maple?
Yes, you can. You can get just about any foliage to reduce to some degree if you're persistent in applying the techniques necessary. But of course, something that starts with smaller leaves is going to ultimately produce smaller leaves. You start with something that's got a huge leaf, you might get it to shrink, but you might not ever get it to shrink enough that it isn't a distraction to see those big leaves.
Does that happen with flowers too?
Yeah, you don't get the flowers to shrink down, generally speaking. Flowers and fruit tend to stay the same size. But you can get leaves to shrink down, you can get internodal distance to shrink down. And that helps make your plant more compact.
You said that spring is the best time to prune it, but do you need to prune it in the fall too? Like how often?
You can, right? Because I did. And I've repotted these at this time of year too. There are things you can do, but they are perhaps more risky. And it depends on how much of a risk you're willing to run. In most cases, if you don't need to run a risk, there's no good reason to do it. But in my case, if I didn't do this tree now, it wouldn't get done. And then next spring, it would start growing from these long shoots, and then all the work that's been built into it, not all of it, but much of the work that's been built into it so far would be lost. Because as these parts continued to grow, these parts would get more coarse, and the shape that it's been given so far would begin to disappear. That's what happens, You can have a bonsai that's been in training for 25 years, right? It's a nice plant. And then let's say the person who owns it loses interest, or they're no longer physically able to keep up with it, and it goes through 2 or 3 years of just random growth. That tree has to take a giant step back in order to be retrained to be a bonsai again. It can lose all its definition in a very short time. It takes years and years to build it in. It just takes a couple of years to grow it out.
Do red maples leave sap in the spring?
They ooze sap.
Yeah.
I don't like that term, bleed, because it automatically makes you think you're doing something wrong, It's never good to be bleeding anybody. So it does run sap, but that doesn't hurt the tree. It hurts us to look at it. You look at the plant, it's got, this stuff oozing out and running down the thing. You feel bad for having made it do that. But if that hurt the tree, then sugar maples would have been wiped out in New England a long time ago, right? Because they collect the sap by hundreds of gallons. The plant can afford to run some sap. It isn't going to cause any real damage. What it might do is, attract aphids or sooty mold. There may be peripheral consequences of it, but not going to kill the tree. Okay, so
How often do you feed that in winter with rock?
how often do what in winter?
Fertilizer.
Not at all in the winter. Once a plant like this shuts down, right, goes dormant, it's not photosynthesizing anymore. I don't need to be adding fertilizer to it. There are people who will give it phosphate because the roots might still be growing, but you don't have to. The plant will do fine. Remember, they're living things. They don't need us to live. They only need us when we take them out of their natural surroundings and put them into a pot. But all their processes still work. They know how to keep themselves alive. But they can't get water if you contain their roots. But their roots will still grow, plant will still produce leaves. You know, fertilizing, people say feeding, but it's not feeding. It's more like vitamins, you know. The plant feeds itself. The fertilizer helps it do that.
What's your water regimen?
Check them daily and water as needed. Never more than once a day, even in the heat of the summer. But the medium that I grow in is different from the medium that most bonsai people use. Most bonsai people use a medium that lets go of water more rapidly than this does. And so sometimes they wind up watering 2, even 3 times a day in the heat of the summer. I can't do that. You know, my plants have to be able to go 24 hours between waterings in the hottest part of summer. They have to. And they do. Yes, many, many heresies you've heard today. I think you should go home and do a good act of contrition and forget everything I said. And then you'll learn the real stuff later.
Well, let's thank Arthur for